Nadia, please, you have to believe me. Everything is gone.
What do you mean everything is gone? Marcus, this is your mansion. Your cars are right there.
The bank has taken all of it. My accounts are frozen, the business has collapsed, and I have nothing left.
And you're telling me this now? 2 months before our wedding.
I didn't know who else to tell. Nadia, I'm a broke man now.
I don't think I can marry a broke man. I'm out of here.
Nadia, please.
What if I told you that the man who loves you could destroy everything just to find out if your love is real? Marcus dropped his phone on the marble floor of his Lagos mansion, and the sound echoed through the empty living room like a gunshot. His hands were shaking, not because he was broke, not because the bank had really seized his properties, but because in 3 days he was going to lie to the woman he loved more than his own life. Nadia didn't know it yet, but her whole world was about to be tested. She was sitting in her small flat in Surulere, trying on her wedding shoes, laughing with her best friend Sonia about how her feet would ache after standing all day at the wedding reception. Her wedding was 2 months away. Her dress was already fitted. Her mother, Regina, had already started calling relatives from the village. Nadia had no idea that her fiancé, sitting alone in his 15-room mansion on Banana Island, was staring at old photographs of women he used to date, women who smiled at him only when his account was fat and disappeared the moment rumors of financial trouble started. He had seen it happen to his friend Clement. He had seen it happen to his cousin Derek. Woman after woman, chasing the money, not the man. Marcus loved Nadia, but love, when you have money, comes with a shadow of doubt that follows you everywhere. A whisper that never stops asking, does she love me or does she love what I can give her? That whisper had grown too loud to ignore. So Marcus made a decision that would shake 2 families and test a love that hadn't even been proven yet. He called his lawyer, Stanley, a quiet man who had handled his business for over 10 years. He said, I need you to help me disappear. Stanley frowned. Disappear? Marcus, what are you talking about? Not really disappear. I need you to help me become poor for a while, on paper. I need everyone, including Nadia, to believe my business has collapsed. Stanley dropped the pen he was holding. You want to lie to the woman you're about to marry? Marcus's jaw tightened. I want to know the truth about her before I put a ring that means forever on her finger. That night, Marcus packed 1 small suitcase. He instructed his staff to go on leave. He turned off the generators. He locked the gates of the mansion that had taken him 12 years to build, brick by brick, deal by deal, sleepless night by sleepless night. Then he moved into a tiny 1-room apartment in a Face Me, I Face You compound in Ajegule, the kind of place with 1 toilet shared by 6 families, where the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbor's television and the smell of frying akara drifted in every morning like a bitter reminder of how far he had fallen, even though in truth he hadn't fallen at all. The next morning, he called Nadia. His voice cracked, not because he was acting, but because lying to her already felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Nadia, he said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down. On the other end of the line, Nadia's heart began to pound. She could hear it in his voice. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She had no idea that the next words out of his mouth would change everything she thought she knew about the man she was about to marry. The bank has taken everything, Marcus said, his voice trembling through the phone. The mansion, the cars, even my personal account is frozen. Nadia, I have nothing left. Silence. Nadia sat frozen on her bed, the wedding shoes still dangling from her fingers. Her mind raced through 1,000 thoughts in that single moment. The wedding, the mansion she had dreamed of living in, the future she had imagined with Marcus. And then, just as fast as those thoughts came, they left. Where are you right now? She asked. Marcus blinked, surprised. He had expected questions about money, about the wedding, about what would happen to their plans. He had not expected that question. I'm in Ajegule, he said slowly. A small apartment. It's It's not much. Send me the address. I'm coming. Marcus's chest tightened. This wasn't part of the plan. He had expected her to ask for time to think. He had expected hesitation, maybe even excuses about work or family. He had not expected her to simply say, I'm coming. 2 hours later, Nadia stood outside the small, rusted gate of the Face Me, I Face You compound. Her designer bag, the one Marcus had bought her for her last birthday, slung over her shoulder, looking completely out of place among the noise of hawkers, blaring music, and children playing football in the sandy compound. When Marcus opened the door and saw her standing there, guilt nearly swallowed him whole. Her eyes were red from crying, but her back was straight, her chin lifted. She wasn't there to cry over lost luxury. She was there for him. I brought food, she said simply, holding a nylon bag of rice and stew she had cooked herself. And I brought this. She handed him an envelope. Inside was cash. Not much, but it was every naira of her personal savings. Marcus, I can't take this, he said, his voice breaking for real this time. You didn't ask me to marry your money, she said firmly. I didn't agree to marry your mansion. Marcus, look at me. We will start again from zero if we have to. That night, Nadia went home and began quietly selling her things. Her television, her generator, even the gold jewelry her late father had given her before he passed on. She told no one except Sonia, who begged her to reconsider. Nadia, Sonia asked, watching her friend pack her jewelry box for the 3rd time that week. Are you sure about this? You're about to give up everything for a man who has nothing to offer you anymore. Nadia paused, holding her father's old watch in her palm. Sonia, when my father was alive, he used to say something. He said, a woman does not marry a man's money. She marries his character. Money can vanish overnight. Character stays. She looked up at her friend, eyes glistening. Marcus's character has not changed. Only his bank account has. I'm not leaving him because he's poor now. I love the man, not his bank account balance. Sonia had no reply. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus sat alone in his small rented room, staring at the envelope of cash Nadia had given him, money that represented her entire savings, money she could not afford to lose. For the first time since he started this test, doubt crept into his chest. What if I'm the one who doesn't deserve her? But he pushed the thought away. He wasn't done testing yet, and what came next would push Nadia further than she had ever imagined.
2 weeks passed, and word began to spread. Nadia's mother, Regina, was the first to hear the rumors. Whispered gossip from church members who claimed Marcus's company had collapsed, that the wedding might be cancelled, that Nadia's future had crumbled overnight. Regina stormed into Nadia's flat one evening, her wrapper nearly falling off from how fast she had walked. Is it true? Regina demanded. Is it true that this man has lost everything? Nadia nodded quietly, folding a blouse she planned to sell. Regina's face twisted with panic. Nadia, you cannot marry a poor man. Do you know how hard I trained you? Do you know the sacrifices I made? I did not raise you to suffer. Mama, Nadia said calmly, though her chest burned with frustration. I didn't fall in love with Marcus's money. I fell in love with him. Love does not pay school fees, Regina snapped. Love does not pay hospital bills. You think love will put food on your table when there is no light, no water, no money? The words stung, but Nadia refused to back down. If Marcus and I have to eat gari and groundnut every day for the next 5 years while we rebuild, I will do it gladly because I know the man beside me has a good heart. Regina left the flat in tears, warning her daughter that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. That same week, Marcus's own family began to pressure him. His mother, Flora, arrived at his shabby one-room apartment unannounced, nearly fainting from the smell and the state of the compound. Marcus, what is the meaning of this? My son, sleeping in a place like this? Where is your pride? Marcus, torn between guilt and his need to continue the test, simply told her, Mama, this is temporary. I'm rebuilding. Flora studied her son's face carefully. Something didn't sit right with her, but she said nothing more. Meanwhile, pressure mounted on the wedding planning. Vendors began calling, demanding deposits Marcus could no longer afford to pay. The hall booking was cancelled. The caterers pulled out. Even Nadia's own Asoebi committee began to quietly withdraw, embarrassed by the sudden change in fortune. One evening, as Nadia sat sewing a torn curtain by candlelight because she had sold her generator, her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Nadia," he said, his voice heavy, "I think we need to talk about the wedding." Her heart sank. She already knew what was coming. "I don't think I can afford the wedding anymore," Marcus continued, his voice breaking with real emotion now, guilt eating him from the inside. Maybe we should postpone or cancel." There was a long pause on the line, and then Nadia said the words that would haunt Marcus for days. "Marcus, I wasn't preparing to marry your house. I was preparing to marry you." The line went silent. Marcus sat in the darkness of his small apartment, tears silently rolling down his face, the phone pressed to his ear, unable to speak. He had built an empire from nothing. He had negotiated multi-million naira deals without blinking. But in that moment, one sentence from a woman who had nothing left to gain from him had broken him completely. And yet, he still wasn't ready to end the test. Because 3 days later, something would happen that would test Nadia beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. And this time, he wouldn't be the one testing her. Life would. If this story is already touching your heart, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Nadia is about to make a decision that will reveal the true size of her heart. Don't miss it. The market woman's stall was empty by the time Nadia passed through Idumota that Thursday afternoon, running errands to sell the last of her jewelry to a buyer her friend Tracy had recommended. That's when she saw her, an elderly woman sitting on a wooden bench outside a small pharmacy, her body thin and frail, her wrapper faded from years of washing, tears silently streaming down her wrinkled face. Nadia almost walked past. She had her own problems, her own wedding hanging by a thread, her own fiancé sleeping in a rented room in Ajegule. But something made her stop. "Mama, are you all right?" Nadia asked gently, crouching beside the old woman. The woman, whose name Nadia would later learn was Mama Efe, looked up with red, exhausted eyes. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't have enough money for my medicine. My heart. The doctor said if I don't take this drug, I will not survive the week." She held up a small prescription slip, her hand shaking so badly the paper fluttered like a leaf in the wind. "I have been sitting here since morning, praying that God will send someone. My son is late. My daughter traveled abroad and has not sent money in 2 years. I have no one." Nadia's throat tightened. She thought of her own father, who had passed away from a heart condition years ago because they couldn't afford proper treatment in time. The memory hit her like cold water. She looked down at the small nylon bag in her hand, the jewelry she was about to sell. It was the last thing of value she owned. The money from it was supposed to help her and Marcus survive the coming weeks, to help pay for the small wedding they still hoped to have, even in their reduced circumstances. She stood there for a long moment, torn between her own uncertain future and the desperate need in front of her. Then, without another word, Nadia walked into the pharmacy. She sold her jewelry to the pharmacist assistant for a lower price than Tracy's contact would have given her, but it was fast, and Mama Efe didn't have time to wait. She used every single naira to pay for the old woman's medication, plus enough for a week's worth of food. When she handed Mama Efe the medicine and a small parcel of provisions, the old woman broke down completely, clutching Nadia's hands. "God will bless you," Mama Efe wept. "God will never let you suffer the way I have suffered. Whatever you are lacking, God will fill it. I don't know your name, my daughter, but heaven has seen what you did today." Nadia smiled through her own tears. "Just get well, Mama. That's all I ask."
What Nadia didn't know was that Marcus's driver, Junior, the same driver who used to take Marcus around before the test began, had happened to be parked nearby, running a private errand. He recognized Nadia and, out of habit, watched the entire scene unfold from a distance. That evening, Junior called Marcus. "Oga, I saw Madam Nadia today. She sold her jewelry, the last of it, to pay for a stranger's medical bills, an old woman she had never met before in her life." Marcus sat in stone silence, his phone pressed against his ear, his chest tightening painfully. She had nothing left. She believed her future was uncertain, her wedding possibly cancelled, her fiancé possibly ruined, and still, faced with someone suffering more than herself, she gave away the very last thing she had. Marcus closed his eyes, shame and love crashing into him at the same time, like two waves colliding. He had built an empire from nothing. He had negotiated multi-million naira deals without blinking. But in that moment, one sentence from a woman who had nothing left to gain from him had broken him completely. And yet, he still wasn't ready to end the test. Because 3 days later, something would happen that would test Nadia beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. And this time, he wouldn't be the one testing her. Life would. Marcus barely slept that night. He sat on the thin, worn mattress of his rented room, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying Junior's words over and over in his mind. She sold her jewelry, the last of it, for a stranger. By morning, he had made up his mind. He would tell Nadia everything. The lie, the test, the mansion that was never really gone. He owed her that much. He called her, his voice shaking. "Nadia, can you come to the house? There's something I need to show you, something I need to tell you." "The apartment?" Nadia asked, slightly confused by the way he said the house. "Just trust me. Come to this address instead." He sent her the address of the Banana Island mansion. Nadia arrived 2 hours later, wearing a simple Ankara gown, her face tired from weeks of stress and sacrifice. When she stepped out of the taxi and saw the towering gates of Marcus's mansion, gates that had been locked for weeks, confusion washed over her face. "Marcus, I don't understand. Why are we here? Isn't this—" The gate slid open. Marcus stood in the doorway of the mansion, dressed not in the worn clothes she had grown used to seeing him in, but in a crisp white shirt, looking every bit the wealthy businessman she had first fallen in love with. Nadia's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. "Marcus, what is going on?" He walked toward her slowly, guilt written all over his face. "Nadia, I need to tell you the truth. My business never collapsed. The bank never took the mansion. My accounts were never frozen. None of it was real." Nadia's face went blank, as if the words hadn't fully registered yet. "I don't understand," she whispered. "It was a test," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "I needed to know if you loved me or if you loved what I could give you. I've watched too many people around me get used by people chasing money, not love. I needed to be sure before I married you." Nadia took a step back, her whole body trembling, not from confusion anymore, but from a rising, burning fury. "A test?" she repeated slowly. "You mean for weeks I sold my belongings? I sold my father's watch. I begged my mother to understand why I was staying with a poor man. I gave away my last savings twice because I believed you had lost everything. And all of it was a test?" "Nadia, please, let me explain. You let me suffer," she screamed, tears now streaming freely down her face. "You let me believe the man I loved was broken, was struggling, was in pain, and you watched me. While I cried myself to sleep worrying about your future, you were sitting somewhere, judging whether I deserved you." Marcus reached for her hand, but she yanked it away. "I'm not angry that you tested me, Marcus. I'm angry that you thought my love needed to be tested at all. I'm angry that you didn't trust what we already had. Do you know how many nights I prayed for God to help you rebuild? How many nights I cried, not for the mansion, but because I was scared for you? She turned to leave, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor of the compound, floor she now realized had never actually left his ownership. Nadia, wait, Marcus said without turning back. Don't call me, she said without turning back. I need time. I need to understand who I've actually been engaged to. She walked out through the same gate that had been locked for weeks, leaving Michael standing alone in the mansion he had pretended to lose, a mansion that suddenly felt emptier than it ever had, even during the weeks it sat abandoned. For the first time since this entire test began, Marcus realized he might have already lost the very thing he was trying to protect. Nadia didn't answer Marcus's calls for 6 days. She blocked him from picking her up. She refused to see him at church. When his mother Flora called to beg her to reconsider, Nadia politely but firmly told her she needed space. Sonia stayed by her friend's side through those difficult days, watching Nadia cry, rage, and eventually fall into a heavy, exhausted silence. I don't even know what I'm angry about anymore, Nadia admitted one evening, staring blankly at her ceiling. Am I angry that he lied? Or am I angry that some part of me is relieved the mansion is still there? Maybe both, Sonia said gently. You are allowed to feel confused, Nadia. He put you through something painful. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his real home, the mansion he had pretended to lose, feeling more lost than he had ever felt while actually living in that tiny room in Ajeguli. He called Stanley, his lawyer, the only person who had known the truth from the beginning. I think I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me, Marcus admitted, his voice hollow. Stanley sighed. Marcus, when I helped you plan this test, I warned you. You wanted proof of her loyalty, but loyalty isn't something you extract through deception. It's something you build through trust. Marcus buried his face in his hands. I know that now. So what will you do? Marcus thought for a long moment. Then he stood up, a new resolution hardening in his chest. I'm going to fix this, he said, properly, publicly, no more hiding. The following Sunday, Marcus arranged a meeting between both families, Nadia's mother Regina, his own mother Flora, close relatives, and even the church pastor who was originally scheduled to conduct their wedding. Nadia arrived reluctantly, only because her mother insisted she at least hear him out in front of witnesses. Marcus stood before both families, his voice steady despite his nervousness. I owe everyone here an apology, he began, especially Nadia. I let my own insecurities and fears turn into a lie that hurt the woman I love. I let doubt take control instead of trusting what we already had. I made her suffer for weeks over something that was never true, and I take full responsibility for that. He turned to face Nadia directly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Nadia, you didn't need to prove anything to me. Your actions, every single one of them, showed me who you are. You gave away money you didn't have to spare. You stood by a man you believed had nothing left. You chose love over comfort again and again without hesitation. I was the one who needed to prove I was worthy of you, not the other way around. He knelt down in front of everyone, pulling out his small velvet box. I already asked you to marry me once, under false pretenses that I created myself. So today I'm asking you again, this time with complete honesty. Nadia, will you marry me? Not the version of me hiding behind lies and tests, but the real me, flawed, insecure sometimes, but completely committed to earning your trust every single day. The room fell silent, all eyes on Nadia. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the man kneeling before her, the same man who had hurt her deeply, but also the same man whose remorse felt painfully real. Marcus, she said slowly, I need you to understand something first. The room held its breath.
I need you to understand, Nadia continued, her voice steady despite her tears, that what you did wasn't just a test on me. It was a test on us, on the very foundation of what we were built in. And you failed to trust the foundation before you tried to test it. Marcus remained on his knee, listening, his heart pounding. You said you wanted to know if I loved you or your money, Nadia continued. But Marcus, if you had simply asked me, if you had simply talked to me about your fears, I would have told you. I would have shown you through every single day of our relationship, without you needing to destroy your own life and mine to find an answer. She wiped her tears, taking a deep breath. My father used to tell me that trust is not something you demand. It's something you build, brick by brick, the same way you built this mansion. You don't test the foundation of a house by trying to knock it down. You test it by living in it, day after day, and seeing if it holds. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding washing over him completely for the first time. I forgive you, Nadia said finally, and the room let out a collective breath. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll forget what this taught me. She reached down and gently pulled him up to his feet. If we do this, if we really do this, I need your word. No more tests, no more secrets, no more deciding on your own what I need to prove and how I need to prove it. If you have doubts, fears, insecurities, you come to me. We face them together, not as judge and subject, but as equals. I promise, Marcus said immediately, his voice thick with emotion. I promise, Nadia, never again. Regina, who had been quietly watching everything unfold with tears in her eyes, finally spoke up. My daughter, are you sure about this? Nadia looked at her mother, then at Marcus, then finally out at the small crowd of family members gathered to witness this unusual, painful, but ultimately honest moment. Mama, I'm sure. Not because he's rich, not because this mansion is beautiful, but because a man just knelt in front of everyone he knows and admitted he was wrong. That takes a kind of courage that money can't buy. Flora, Marcus's mother, walked over and embraced Nadia tightly. Welcome to the family, my daughter. Properly this time. No more games. The extravagant wedding Marcus had originally planned, the one meant to impress Lagos high society with imported flowers and a 5-tier cake, was completely cancelled. In its place, Marcus and Nadia planned something smaller, quieter, and infinitely more meaningful. A simple ceremony at the same small church where Nadia's father used to worship, with close family and friends, and a reception held not in a 5-star hotel, but in the very compound in Ajegunle where Marcus had spent weeks living among ordinary people he now insisted on inviting, including Mama Efe, the elderly woman Nadia had helped without ever expecting anything in return. But there was one more twist waiting to unfold, something that would prove, once and for all, that Nadia's kindness had planted seed neither she nor Marcus could have imagined. The morning of the wedding, Lagos sunlight poured golden and warm over the small church compound, glinting off the white ribbons tied along the pews. Nadia stood at the entrance in a simple, elegant white gown, nothing like the elaborate designer dress she had originally planned to wear, but somehow it felt more like her than anything imported from Paris ever could. As she prepared to walk down the aisle, a familiar face pushed gently through the small crowd gathered outside the church. My daughter, a voice called out. Nadia turned to see Mama Efe, dressed in a beautiful new wrapper, her health visibly restored, her eyes bright and full of life in a way Nadia hadn't seen the day they first met. Mama, you came, Nadia rushed to embrace Mama Efe. Of course I came, Mama Efe said, holding Nadia's face gently in her weathered hands. I told you God would repay you. Come, let me show you something. Confused, Nadia followed Mama Efe to the church parking area where a modest but well-maintained car was parked along with a young man standing proudly beside it. This is my nephew Gideon, Mama Efe explained. After you helped me, I told him what you did. He works with a foundation that provides small business grants to struggling families.
When he heard your fiancé's story, the real story, the test, everything, he was moved. The foundation wants to sponsor Marcus's next housing project, the one for low-income families in Ajegule that he mentioned to my nephew during the weeks you both lived there. Nadia's eyes widened. She hadn't even known Marcus had mentioned wanting to build affordable housing, a dream he had quietly shared with a few neighbors during his weeks of pretending to have nothing. Life has a strange way of rewarding kindness, my daughter, Mama Ife said, smiling warmly. You gave without expecting anything in return. Now watch how it comes back to you multiplied. Inside the church, as the wedding ceremony began, Marcus stood at the altar watching Nadia walk towards him, radiant despite the simplicity of her dress, more beautiful to him in that moment than she had ever been in any expensive gown he could have bought her. As the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, applause and joyful shouting erupted from the small congregation, a mixture of wealthy business associates Marcus had once surrounded himself with, and the ordinary hand-working neighbors from Ajegule, who unknowingly taught him more about genuine humility and community than his mansion ever had. Months later, Marcus and Nadia broke ground on the affordable housing project Mama Ife's nephew had helped fund, a project that would eventually provide safe, dignified homes for dozens of families in Ajegule, the same community that had sheltered Marcus during his weeks of pretending to have nothing. Nadia often visited the site personally, remembering the day she sold her jewelry for a stranger, never imagining that single act of kindness would ripple outward into something far bigger than she could have dreamed. And Marcus, standing beside her, finally understood what true wealth really meant. Not the mansion, not the properties, not the business empire he had built brick by brick. True wealth was a woman who loved him enough to stay when she believed he had nothing, and generous enough to give her last coin to a stranger even in her darkest moments. He never tested her trust again. He didn't need to. Some people search their whole lives for proof of love, when the proof was standing right in front of them all along, not in grand gestures or extravagant tests, but in quiet, selfless acts of kindness that ask for nothing in return. If this story touched your heart today, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful African drama stories like this one. Share it with someone who needs it. See you in the next story.